Something which is coming to an end is the government's 100-day plan. This, of course, announced just after election and essentially rushing through mostly under urgency a lot of the policies that they campaigned on. So we're just coming into the final few days of that. Somebody who's been watching closely the implementation of some of these policies is Paul Barder from the Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit of the Salvation Army. Paul, kia ora, good morning. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, morning, Andrew. Good to be here.
Some of the announcements this week, and honestly, there's some concerns here from my point of view, at least, and love to get your perspective. A claim this week that that the government was going to bring an end to emergency housing, or what we've seen of people in emergency situations being put up in motels and backpackers. Now, of course, you can see both sides of the ledger on this one, because the Salvation Army involved in providing emergency housing in some areas. What do you make of the policy? Well, what little we know of this policy, Paul?
Well, first of all, I better clarify, we don't provide emergency housing.
Okay. Yep.
The Salvation Army does provide what's called transitional housing, and that's a different, it also is a response to homelessness, but it is not the emergency housing that the minister.
You guys don't run hotels and backpackers. No, I appreciate that. Sorry, thank you for that correction. Yeah.
And I think that's, I guess that's one of our real concerns. Is we would agree with the minister that emergency housing is something that needs to end, certainly in the form it is at the moment, because too many people are staying too long in and really what are supposed to be very short-term emergency responses. That's why it's called emergency housing, and people are getting stuck there for weeks and months even, and so that's why it's pleasing to hear that the desire to do something about that.
Is it too simplistic to say if we had more transitional housing, we wouldn't need emergency housing? Or, I mean, to end emergency housing, these people need to have somewhere to go, surely?
Yes, and that's the next point, that you want to end emergency housing. People land emergency housing because they cannot find somewhere to live. Some of the stories we've written about and looked at, coming out of the experience of our own agencies, are people, for instance, their rental tenancy has ended and they've not been able to find somewhere else, and that tenancy has ended perhaps because the house they're living in has been sold, or perhaps they have run into affordability issues and weren't able to pay rent. Those are, there's a couple of examples of what's happening to people. People are also, of course, coming out of that homelessness situation where they've been in overcrowded settings and maybe it's just not become possible to stay there, sleeping in cars, etc. It's complicated. We have written in our State of the Nation just this year about the enormous pressure there is on housing because of our population increasing, and that's translating into the rental housing market. And the people who get squeezed out are those who are in the most vulnerable situations, either lose tenancies or simply can't find them when they're competing against those who look and are, have certain incomes and regular incomes and perhaps better in position to take a place.
Would it be fair to say, Paul, that if people end up in emergency housing, housing in some ways is a symptom. Something else has gone wrong significantly in their life. They've lost a job. They've had a relationship breakup. They've been in a situation where there may have been domestic abuse or violence. That, yes, these people need housing, but it's more complicated than just the housing, if you like.
I think that, yes, there are many people who come into and they come to the Salvation Army, look for support to deal with the multiple things going on. Now, support workers are often able to help them, for instance, find an emergency solution in their housing, and then and deal with some of the other issues that are going on. People have trauma. There's, as you say, maybe many issues. So it's not a simple. There's no simple solutions there, and I think the minister, in announcing the end to emergency housing, immediately sort of clarified that he didn't expect it to end in the near future. So we have a long-term challenge here, and I guess one of our concerns would be that in the current settings, there's a talk about increasing the scrutiny of people's applications for emergency housing, and the experience of those working in the front line. It's not easy to get these grants. There's quite a process that's already worked through. There's a lot of conditionality about them already. It's not a free, not being sort of dished out as a free pass, which might appear to be the thinking. So further scrutiny for people who are already stressed and have multiple traumas in their life may not, I would question whether that will really help much at all.
There were some comments about prioritisation for people with young families, and of course massive concerns about people with children living in motel units for prolonged periods of time. I suppose if you prioritise those people, then there's going to be more pressure on people for whom that isn't their situation or circumstance.
Well, yes, there's certainly people who have been waiting months, years even, on the social housing register for social housing. And there's that tension that a group of people will be put into that high priority setting, and they will join many other people. Most of the people on the social housing register these days are in fact in a pretty high priority settings. So
is it at least good to have an aspirational goal in this space? And like you mentioned, the minister wasn't saying, hey, this is going to go away tomorrow. But I suppose to imagine a future where we didn't need emergency housing, and then ask the question, what policy decisions would need to be made in order to achieve that aspirational goal? Is this at least heart in the right place, but more details to come, do you think?
Absolutely. This is something that is good to hear, that there's the desire to do that, and this is an opportunity then to talk about, well, what will make a difference. And the minister has also talked about, for instance, the support for people to sustain a private rental tenancy. And that's one of the areas we've identified as really crucial. For instance, the level of accommodation supplement and the other payments that are available to people to help them stay in, so they don't fall into homelessness in their existing rental housing, or that they can find and sustain new tenancy. There's no help to anyone if they're moved from emergency housing into a private rental, which they then a few months later lose because they can't afford to keep paying the rent. So
certainly.
And I think the other thing the minister spoke about, which again is something we'd really like to see, is working with private landlords to give people the opportunity to make a private rental arrangement work. We would point out that people are frequently landing in emergency housing because their private rental has been ended by private landlords. So there is a real tension going on here between what is hoped for and what can actually work. Certainly. And introducing, for instance, the no-cause evictions, the 90-day evictions, for reintroducing that into private rentals will add to the number of people who are actually losing their homes and coming into homelessness. So we have tensions here in the new policy approach that really need to be addressed.
Yeah, no, certainly there are some details to be ironed out in that regard. This also seems to be the case for another policy that I wanted your thoughts on, the announcement of boot camps. Again, this was something which was talked about in the election campaign. Still not a lot of details on this, but I suppose that idea of taking young people, especially those who have perhaps been involved with criminal activity, and saying, hey, let's get them out of the city, let's get them perhaps away from some of the negative social networks and influences that they have. Let's give them some positive role models, some fresh air, and some challenges for them to work out. Could this be transformational, or what's been the previous experience, or perhaps even the overseas experience with these sorts of things?
I think the general experience with these kinds of programs has not been terribly encouraging. It's been tended to be, if it's targeted at reducing at reoffend, and has overall past evaluations have shown them as with not particularly exciting results compared to not doing those kind of programs. I think too, there's a couple of things around what's been announced that really need to be considered. Firstly, the minister has talked about in terms of addressing those higher offender sort of groups of teenagers who are repeat what she described as serious and repeat offending.
The really tough kids, as it were.
That's right. And again, and it's also talked about as a year-long program. Previous such programs have been intended to be in the sort of 6 to 12 weeks type category. And the minister does talk about trauma-informed approaches and working with whānau and families and communities as part of these programs. So there's recognition in that announcement that you do need to take account of all these things. It's also only intended to be for 10 children, young people, sorry, starting this year. So it's definitely a pilot, and that's a drop in the well, not drop in the ocean. It's certainly a small part of what needs to be done about addressing the issues around youth offending. And we would strongly be talking about strengthening the kind of preventative youth work that needs to be much more widely available in the communities where young people live, where they have other options in their lives other than essentially getting involved in the criminal side of teenage
Certainly
life.
taking the 10 tougher kids in New Zealand and taking them away somewhere. It sounds like a disastrous reality TV show to me from that regard. Interested to get your thoughts on this one because, I mean, two things of concern. The compulsory aspect of this, that this would be done as a punishment. This wouldn't be an opt-in stuff. I mean, these are still legally, technically, and biologically children that we're talking about here. And I suppose also the question that I have, yes, good to get positive role models for these young people, good to give them other skills and things to stretch and grow character. But couldn't this be done in local communities through existing programs? Why do we need to reinvent the wheel?
Exactly. I think there is a real... there are existing programs that can be effective. Most of the time, it's simply a lack of resourcing going into the communities where the young people are. And whether we want to spend our resourcing on sort of intensive programs sort of almost at the bottom of the cliff, or whether we actually want to get involved in making the communities better where the young people are living and improving the relationships that define where they're at. Because in the end, you take people out of community. Well, we've got a troubled history in this country of taking people out of into care and institutions. That the abuse and care inquiry that has been running the past few years has been documenting. So we must tread really carefully, and we would be strongly suggesting that there are other options available to us that may have greater reach for more young people and provides a better medium to long-term response.
But hey, I suppose as we come to the end of the first 100 days, it was something campaigned on, it was an election promise, so they've got to tick the box and at least do a trial version of this. Paul, very much appreciate the work that you do, the social policy analysis that you and the team do at the Salvation Army. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.